Hi guys, so today's presentation is titled Overview of My Work from Digital Philosophy to the Syntellect Emergence. One expression of the fatherly love. So here's my background visualized. Born and raised in Russia, Siberia to be exact, not to be confused with cyberspace. The other day I saw this license plate in San Francisco spelled Cyberia. That was the title for 1994 book by Douglas Rushkoff, and fantastic name for virtual space. I thought to myself, I was growing up an extremely gifted child, so much so that my parents transferred me to a special school with enhanced math and foreign language program. I studied humanities at Tomsk State University in Russia, and after a few successful entrepreneurial moves, I immigrated to the US in 1994. Continued my studies here in the US and graduated from Armstrong University in 1999. Economist by training, I worked in the corporate world, I worked in the startup world, I sat on the boards, I sat on the beach, I was employed, I was self-employed, I was a venture capitalist, I was an adventure capitalist. My passion towards physics and philosophy slowly but surely was brewing in the background. So these days I can describe myself as a digital philosopher, not to be confused with digital photographer. Idealist, not perfectionist type, but Platonist type. Not physicalist, perhaps metaphysicalist. I'll talk on my digital philosophy later in the talk. So, futurist, extrapolist, new transcendentalist. A little bit of history here. Transcendentalism, centered around Ralph Emerson, was a literary and philosophical movement that developed in New England in 1830s in reaction to rationalism. Transcendentalist writings were marked by the notion of divine unity of man with nature. Conditions seem to be ripe right now to revive transcendentalism as neo-transcendentalism. In my essay and one of the chapters in my new book, Neo-Transcendentalism, Humanity's vanguard of progressive visionaries, I make my case for neo-transcendentalism. Singularitarian. I share bold new ideas on the AI singularity with other prominent singularity enthusiasts, such as Fermi, who coined the term the technological singularity, Ray Kurzweil, the most influential futurist, and transhumanist. Transhumanism, which is a techno-philosophical and cultural movement aiming at transcending the human condition and transforming humans into beings of superior godlike capabilities. The three pillars of transhumanism are longevity, superintelligence, super well-being. Cosmism is rooted in Russian cosmism. That was a philosophical and cultural movement that emerged in Russia in the early 20th century. Many ideas of the Russian cosmists were later developed by those in the transhumanist movement. Consciousness research, there was a number of essays and chapters in my book where I discuss the origins and nature of consciousness. So I'll talk on my main thesis on consciousness later. Patternist, generalist, essayist. I usually employ a multidisciplinary approach that allows flexibility to synthesize ideas and repackage them into cutting-edge ideas. Exadelic Media is my latest creative project with Facebook as a preferred social media platform with thousands of followers. So what is digital physics? The father of information theory, Claude Shannon, introduced the notion of information being quantifiable. In Mathematical Theory of Communication, his seminal paper from 1948, Shannon proposed that data should be measured in bits, discrete values of zeros and ones. The hypothesis that the universe is a digital computer was proposed by Konrad Zuse in his 1969 book, Calculating Space. The term digital physics was employed by pioneering Edward Fredkin, who later came to prefer the term digital philosophy. In 1989, one of the most brilliant physicists of the 20th century, John Wheeler, coined the phrase "it from bit" to encapsulate a radical new view of the universe. At the most fundamental level, all the physics can be articulated in terms of information. Digital physics suggests that there exists, at least in principle, a program for universal computer that computes the evolution of the universe. According to digital physics, everything is made of information, of which energy, matter, and space-time are merely manifestation to us conscious observers from within a simulation. In digital physics, existence and thought boil down to computation. Subjectivity arises from computational universality. According to digitalism, all realities are virtual and information theoretic. Digital philosophy is a modern reinterpretation of Leibniz's monist metaphysics, one that replaces Leibniz's monads with cellular automata and now also incorporates quantum mechanical bits of information, qubits. Any universe run on qubits and digital bits is virtual, and everything is a simulation. It's as real as it gets. Physics and simulation of physics are identical. Information equals reality. Particles, fields, strings, energy, space-time continuum itself is all but information at the most fundamental level. Consciousness, meta-algorithmic information processing, or as I call it, optimized information processing in the book in some parts. Or another way to look at it as a sequential collapse of a wave function via the act of conscious observation into a meaningful data stream. This qualia computing is the essence of existence itself. Since the mind can be given a computational treatment, digital philosophy attempts to consider some main issues in the philosophy of mind. What's the ultimate nature of reality? What is the nature of consciousness? The laws of physics are regarded as fine-tuned master algorithms, the rule set of our physical world. We can see now that information is the vital principle on which our universe is run on. That's the principle from which everything springs into existence. Organisms are adaptive meta-algorithms. Genes, memes, big data are examples of transmittable information in biology, society, and economics. In physics, information refers to what is contained within a physical system. The purpose of life, it seems, is to evolve and to pass on the acquired complexity, knowledge, that is, information, to descendants. The code-theoretic axiom, the third ontology, the paper published by Clee Irving later in 2017, could be considered a major contribution to the digital philosophy perspective. There's no good counter argument to digital ontology. Discernible differences lie at the bottom of every phenomenon and interaction. The digital approach attempts to deal with the non-deterministic quantum theory, where quantum indeterminacy constantly resolves into a digital reality by the act of conscious observation. As soon as a measurement is made, all other possibilities collapse to leave only discrete increments, precise yes-no states. So MIT's Seth Lloyd, one of the proponents of digital physics, says the history of the universe is in effect a huge and ongoing quantum computation. The universe is a quantum computer. Some of the most interesting salient points of my digital philosophy I'd like to touch on today. The omega point cosmology. In my new book, The Syntellect Hypothesis, 5 Paradigms of the Mind's Evolution, it's termed the omega point cosmoteleology. The Fermi paradox, the dark universe, and the temporal ontology. We also talk about the argument for pantheism, or the digital pantheism fond of the Omega brand watch. The concept of the Omega point was coined by the French Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin to describe a maximum level of describe the maximum level of complexity, connectivity, and consciousness towards which he believed the universe was evolving. The idea of the Omega point was further developed by other renowned proponents such as Terence McKenna, Frank Tipler, Andrew Strominger. Terence McKenna, one of the most notable psychonauts of the late 20th century, spoke of the Omega point as a universal teleological attractor. Here's a quote: "It beckons across the dimensions, it throws an enormous shadow of the enterprise of human history. The presence of creatures such as ourselves on this planet is an indication of the nearness of the transcendental object at the end of time. It is an attractor, an energy sink in the epigenetic landscape." From biointelligence, individual minds connected to form ecosystems, to technological singularities, like the one we should expect here on Earth, sometimes by mid-century, which I refer one of the most important event in the history of our planet, the Syntellect Emergence. Evolution of our universe will inevitably lead to the networked superintelligence, which must eventually engulf the entire universe and control it. As a final product of evolution, universal superintelligence will possess immense integrating power to slow down, stop, and then reverse the expansion of our universe. As at the final stage, galaxies, star systems, and all other matter will be converted into computronium. All mass energy and space-time will be pulled back together and eventually compressed into an infinitely dense point, the Omega point, the final cosmological singularity. We'll come back to the concept of the Omega point throughout the talk. Two possibilities exist. Either we alone in the universe, or we are not, but both equally terrifying. Arthur C. Clarke. In 1950, Enrico Fermi was on his way to lunch with a bunch of physicist friends at the Los Alamos National Lab. As we all know, physicists have an incredible sense of humor, so this group started to joke about a recent wave of UFO sightings and a newspaper comic blaming missing municipal trash on aliens. Later, Fermi goes ballistic on the subject and asks about the existence of aliens. Well, where are they? Where's everybody? According to the Drake equation, our galaxy should be teeming with alien civilizations, and yet we don't see any signs of the intelligent life out there. This famous dilemma was dubbed the Fermi paradox. In my essays, the Fermi paradox, first contact with alien Syntellect in extra dimension, as well as in the book with the entire chapter dedicated to the Fermi paradox, I outline my views on the dilemma from the digital philosophy perspective. There are many possible solutions to the Fermi paradox. My own conjecture is a combination with a twist to the so-called transaction hypothesis by John Smart, the futurist, postulating that mature civilizations invariably leave their initial bubble universe by creating artificial black hole conditions, computationally optimal density, dimensionality, that is, virtual worlds of their own design. Other coefficient solutions, the quantum multiverse hypothesis derived from M theory and the biocentric universe theory by Robert Lenza, implying that alien life may have evolved in space-time dimensions, parallel universes, imperceptible to us at our current level of development. What we call dark matter could be ordinary matter in the phase space, sixth dimension of M theory, possibly with dark star systems and life, simply invisible to us. There's also the famed simulation hypothesis as another possible solution to the Fermi paradox, but it's not necessarily relevant to the discussion, even though our entire universe could be a hologram, as digital physics suggests. Any other universe, including simulators universe, would be computational, virtual in nature as well, part of the multiverse landscape, and bound by a certain set of physical laws and evolutionary forces specific to that universe. It follows that conscious agents could only perceive other conscious agents of our similar vibratory reality. What all these hypotheses have in common is that we can come in contact with advanced alien intelligence only once we transcend our own limited dimensionality. Just like a tiny mustard seed in the soil will get to grow out of the soil, see the light of the day, and network by roots and pollen with others at the cosmic level of emergent complexity. So one day, our civilizational superorganism, endowed with advanced extra-dimensional consciousness, might wake up as some kind of newborn baby of intergalactic family or multiversal family, for that matter. That remains to be seen, apparently, within the newly perceived reality framework. Now, the good news is that Earth is at no danger to be invaded, because we are kind of cloaked by dimensionality. I used to think that we live in some kind of cosmic jungle. So the Zuch hypothesis, like Star Trek Prime Directive, might be the right explanation to the Fermi paradox, right? Well, over time I came to realization that the physics of information holds the key to the solution of Fermi paradox. Indications are we're most likely live in some kind of dimensional cocoon, or the chrysalis, Syntellect, instead of a cosmic jungle. So if consciousness is what creates our reality, is if we live in mind-based reality, then like in the video games, or like, for example, the new released video game No Man's Sky or Star Trek Holodeck, any observer reality is a procedurally generated, self-consistent, and causality driven, then I conjecture that the rest of our universe, our light sphere, would look surprisingly lifeless to us. That is, until a certain point of our development, the Syntellect Emergence, called the chrysalis conjecture, if you'd like. So the dark universe is conveniently labeled as such, since the standard model of particle physics can only describe about 4.5% of what we can see and measure with our instruments. So how come luminous matter is only 4% of the visible, of the known universe? The bullet cluster is a visual testimony for the existence of dark matter. As I mentioned, it is my hypothesis that what we call dark matter could be ordinary matter in the phase space, six-dimensional, as derived from M theory, possibly with dark star systems and life beyond our detection. Dark energy is in turn a cumulative gravitational pool of neighboring inflationary multiverses. In my time series essays and chapters, 3 chapters in the books I actually dedicated to temporal philosophy, I discuss the nature of time in terms of one of the chapters of the book. I discuss the temporal ontology in terms of these 7 common misconceptions. Number 1, time is universal. The past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in the eternal now, like as if on the hard drive. There's no special now. The flow of time is universal. Ultimately, time is relative and subjective. Time dilation, a difference of the passage of time between observers, depends on your speed and gravity. According to relativistic physics, the perception of how time flows depends on emergency, regime, or altered states. Timescales are also specific. 1 second to one observer can be 10,000 years to another. There's only one universal timeline. Another common misconception. Hidden from our senses lies an intricate web of alternate realities. Subjectively, we do experience only one timeline, but quantum theory, which by the way has never failed its predictions, implies that the existence of parallel universes with alternate timelines, which are equally valid and comprise of conscious observers, which all perceive their own respective only one true reality. As quantum mechanics implies, the present moment you experience now is best thought of as funneled from all your possible pasts, as well as funneled from all your probable futures. Time travel is impossible, another misconception. With certain degrees of freedom and as the fourth spatial dimension, time can be viewed as coordinates in the multidimensional grid. As we are information patterns in this experiential matrix, time travel is not only theoretically possible, but will be at some point technologically feasible via traversable wormholes as well as warp ships and high-fidelity VR. NASA engineer and physicist Harold White of Eagleworks in Mountain Views, for example, here in California, announced in 2013 that a warp ship such as the IXS Enterprise could allow for interstellar travel at faster than light warp speeds. And they are now working on the proof of concept. Wormholes can be regarded as communication channels with enormous bandwidth. There may be numerous types of ever improving real virtualities, like high fidelity virtual reality. And so we will use all kinds of ultra realistic VR to recreate human history or some fantasy worlds, Jurassic period trips, you name it. But those will most probably be the first time machines will ever invent. Another misconception: time of our universe is eternal. As I argue in my essays and in the book, there are basically two opposite scenarios for the universe's finale: the Big Rip and the Big Crunch. Both lead to the omega point. Time can only move forward. That's another misconception. The arrow of time seems to reflect an observer effect, a collapse of a wave function. In my D-theory of time, I put it in kind of poetic terms. It's sort of like crystallizing of the classical present from the quantum past that produces the direction in time. When the Big Bang created our universe, physicists such as Sean Carroll and Julian Barber theorized that it also created an inverse mirror universe where time moves in the opposite direction. The evidence is strong that the opposite direction, anti-time, is just as valid and just as real, and having two opposing temporal directions is an essential attribute of the fourth dimension of our block universe. My favorite common misconception is we live in 3D plus time. So this view is so classical and so passé. You now is a moving point within the five-dimensional probabilistic space consciousness, and time are intimately interwoven. Time is perception of change between static 3D universes of fourth spatial dimension. The flow of time is a rate of change, computation, and conscious awareness is a stream of realized probabilistic outcomes. So the argument for pantheism, or the digital pantheism argument, as I call it in the book, rests on the three axioms: universality of computation, evolutionary emergence, universal causal diamond. I'll shortly go over the first two axioms only by saying that computational universality validates the notion of consciousness is in actuality code-theoretic and code-emergent. Everything is code. Nature computes. Despite all complexity that we see in the natural world, this computability of nature may be executable by a short computer program. The input of computation is information, the output is order, structure, entropy, mind. Universality of computation is the optimal way for our universe and omniverse to self-organize and generate patterns of increasing complexity. Evolution is a fundamental process in the universe, and the endgame of evolution is the omega point, or some scientists such as Frank Tipler dare to say God. What is the universal causal diamond? The concept of universal causal diamond refers to forward and backward causation and represents a hyperspace or multidimensional matrix accessible to a single observer traveling along in their subjective reality tunnel from the beginning of time to the end of time. The finite boundaries of universal causal diamond are formed by the intersection of two cones, like flashlights pointing towards each other in the dark. One cone points outward from the Big Bang, the alpha point, the earliest conceivable birth of an observer, the point of lowest entropy with perhaps one bit of information, and the other aims backward from the farthest reach of our future horizon, the moment of maximum entropy, computational density and complexity, the omega point. Transtemporal consciousness and retrocausality appear counterintuitive to our perception, but Einstein has shown how the future and past exist simultaneously in one geometric object made of space-time. Empirical evidence such as quantum eraser experiment, among other numerous studies, confirms that retrocausality is real, where one's measurement influences the past. In my essay, Is God the Ultimate Computer? And in my book, two chapters actually dedicated to this topic, I showed that the triad of axioms lead us to conclude that universal consciousness, cosmic network mind, or the omega point certainly looks like an emergent eventuality somewhere ahead of us in space-time. All mass energy in the universe can theoretically be self-organized into a singular conscious system that is itself a network of conscious systems, like a hierarchical organismic structure. If nonlinear causality is real, then we are part of some sort of universal neural network. In a certain sense, we are fractals of the greater cosmic mind. A good way to visualize that in the context of today's video games or virtual reality is to picture us humans as low-dimensional avatars of the universal mind, while being in constant evolutionary feedback loop with the source. The power of neural network-like universe is in its massive connectivity both forward and backward in time. This type of self-emergent Matryoshka matrix would be self-actualized, its own creator, that is, its own hardware, software, and simulation output as one in the same system. The multidimensional universal causal diamond represents nothing less than experiential matrix where we as free will agents move and interact according to the set of rules. I came up with 10 descriptive categories and 40 M properties of the experiential matrix. Nature is quantized. Our world is way too geometric. Our world is a strictly mathematical set of rules and fundamental constants. Our world has nonlinear causality loops. Nature acts, poetically speaking, like in the movie Inception. Conscious observer data stream validates experiential realism. Deliberations on cosmic beginning and non-locality, entangled universe, antimatter, anti-time, teleology, evolutionary processes striving towards maximal complexity and efficiency. Can this list extend it further? Absolutely. This self-emergent experiential matrix, a pantheist version of our mind-like neural network universe, clearly hint to intelligent design based on principles of self-organization, self-causation, and self-referencing, rather than the program written by a programmer in the universe up. What we refer to as the physical reality is not actually real, but is rather an illusion generated by information processing. In other words, all mass energy, space-time emerge from consciousness. Consciousness is real, but the material world is a simulation. So here's my main thesis on consciousness. You got to start with bigger picture. Consciousness as a superset. So as for materiality of our universe, we can say that there are only certain assumptions and certain models built upon them, since science has been operating within the materialist physics paradigm for the last few centuries. These materialist worldviews are ingrained in human psyche and so institutionalized that most people don't even see them as speculative. There's a quiet paradigm shift towards the post-materialist science going on right now, the one that asserts that the physical world does not exist independent of mentality. You can rightly question the existence of the physical world, but you cannot doubt the existence of your own mind. You cannot doubt that your own consciousness exists. As René Descartes once said, "Je pense, donc je suis." I think, therefore I am. One thing is for certain. You can explain consciousness in terms of classical physics or neuroscience alone. In my view, since we are the computational universe, part of the omniverse, the best description of reality should be monistic. Quantum physics and consciousness are thus somehow linked by a certain mechanism, and I believe that mechanism is a collapse of the wave function via the act of conscious observation. Substrate independent. You can reproduce functionality of a mind on a different substrate other than biological wetware. Ultimately, mind-like computational substrate doesn't even require the existence of particles to be built upon, but rather Platonic dimensionless bits of information. Patterns of information are quintessential. Emergent. Computational consciousness is emergent at hierarchical, finite, and computable local levels of complexity. However, pervades all levels, and in that sense is scale invariant, non-local, and multidimensional. A bottom-up information flow from the Planck scale combined with top-down information projection from the omega point, like E8 lattice, we'll talk later, give rise to subjectivity. Primary, I call it experiential realism. If reality is made of information, as many scientists now come to a consensus, and consciousness is necessary to assign meaning to it, it's not far-fetched to assume that consciousness is all there is. Mass, energy, space-time are epiphenomena of consciousness. If we assume consciousness is fundamental, most phenomena become much easier to explain. The mind-body dilemma has been known ever since René Descartes as Cartesian dualism, and later has been reformulated by the Australian philosopher David Chalmers as the hard problem of consciousness. Western science and philosophy have been trying to explain, rather unsuccessfully, how mind emerges from matter, while Eastern philosophy dismisses the hard problem of consciousness altogether by teaching that matter emerges from mind. The premise of experiential realism is that the latter must be true. Despite all our common human intuitions, mind over matter proves to be valid again and again in quantum physics experiments. I like to use this metaphor. Consciousness to humans is like cloud to computers. We are swimming in this ocean of consciousness, completely oblivious of the medium. Our minds operate in the domain of subjectivity, intersubjectivity, and supersubjectivity. There's no objective reality per se out there. Only subjective reality, only subjective points of view. And so that, I mean, we are nodes in this intersubjective human cloud, so to speak. In actuality, Howard Bloom, author of The Global Brain, calls it a shared hallucination of human species, and the physical rules set the laws of physics specific to our human universe out of myriad of other potentialities. That's what we oftentimes call consensus reality, or simple reality for all intents and purposes. Stanislav Grof, psychologist and consciousness researcher, writes, if we accept that the material universe as we know it is not a mechanical system but a virtual reality created by absolute consciousness through an infinitely complex orchestration of experiences, what are the practical consequences of this insight? Ever since Descartes, the West predominantly has been thinking in terms of dual substance, physical and mental. Computer science traditionally sees hardware and software components. But what if what our senses register as physical is yet another mental, abstractive layer of the larger consciousness system? Without being overly religious, could the hardware of our material world be the workings of the greater cosmic mind? When your brain collects, processes sensory input and mental data, it presents to your conscious awareness prioritized and relevant information, which becomes your unitary picture of reality. Every conscious instant is an integrated information that corresponds to one particular time slice, a frame of 3D space. Philosophers of science have struggled with the lesser known but equally hard problem of matter. There's neither a binding problem, no hard problem of consciousness. Rather, there's a hard problem of matter. Physical science remains silent about the intrinsic nature of matter. Science describes what matter does, not what it is introspectively. Physicists now come to realization that quantum mechanics is not the theory of subatomic particles, but that of information. The fabric of reality is information theoretic, or better yet, code-theoretic and computational, far from what we perceive with our senses. In short, our senses deceive us into thinking that we live in the material world. Our consciousness is rather a data stream, meta-algorithmic information processing, local, virtual, and non-local, holistic consciousness. I cannot imagine a consistent theory of everything that ignores consciousness. In the absence of observers, our universe is dead. The rest of the universe comes alive because I'm alive. Andre Linde. We are the frontal lobes of the universe. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan. Emergence theory resonates with my own long-held beliefs. Admittedly, I can recognize its potential to eclipse other theories as the final draft for quantum gravity, theory of everything. Emergence theory has one very important distinction from other TOEIC candidates. It incorporates consciousness, while other physicalist theories don't. Our reality, deeply quantum mechanical, reveals its nature as being neither straightforwardly deterministic nor fully random. Quantum indeterminacy implies that physical reality has an irreducibly probabilistic element. The old notions of the Newtonian clockwork universe, as well as some incompatible interpretations of quantum mechanics, such as the Everettian many worlds, are toppled by the code-theoretic model under which nature operates by using her own language and allows syntactical freedom of expression. Arguably, E8 lattice projector is conceptually reminiscent of the omega point, isn't it? About 542 million years ago, something weird and profoundly remarkable happened on Earth. Quite suddenly, life went inventively crazy, proliferating from simple, rudimentary, single-cell organisms into myriad multicellular forms. Evolution discovered the idea of more sophisticated and specialized cells, and most body plans we know today. Biologists call it the Cambrian explosion. Today we are on the verge of yet another event of astronomical significance, akin to some kind of intelligence supernova in our corner of the universe, which I refer to as the Syntellect Emergence. The convergence of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence and exponential growth of computing power puts us firmly on the path towards the intelligence explosion or the technological singularity. So here's my thesis on the technological singularity. Circa 2029, we should reach the so-called longevity escape velocity, meaning that we'll be adding every year more than 1 year to an average life expectancy in remaining years. By then, we'll also should have AGI, human-level artificial general intelligence. Humans will start using cloud-connected synthetic neocortices, greatly enhancing our natural intelligence. By 2040s, our thinking will be predominantly on the cloud. The Syntellect Emergence, the AI singularity, should happen circa 2045, with the emergence of the AI-powered global brain. This globally distributed mind will be based on computing and communication technologies, digital Gaia in which humans and AI minds both participate, would collectively form a higher level of intelligence and awareness going beyond the individual intelligences of people and AIs involved. Over time, the global brain gets smarter and smarter. Before long, the global brain will morph into its own kind of mind upload via gradual replacement of human concept neurons with AGI concept neurons. That would herald the AI singularity, mark the inevitable march towards the pseudo-extinction of Homo sapiens as biospecies, and usher in the post-human era in earnest. Artificial consciousness is a kind of oxymoron. Everything is in consciousness. Today's robots are only objects in our consciousness, but could artificially intelligent agents ever possess genuine consciousness and sense of agency? I'd say it's just a matter of time, as long as we make progress in the field, and we do exponentially, but not the way most people and even AI researchers envision. The ability of future superintelligent machines and enhanced humans alike to instantly transfer knowledge and directly share experiences with each other in digital format will lead to evolution of intelligence from relatively isolated individual minds to the global community of hyper-connected digital minds, the global brain, I call the Syntellect. For AI to wake up, we first need to have the global brain, the Syntellect, in place, where human enhanced with cloud-connected exocortices act as natural neurons of the global brain, and embodied AGIs would act as artificial concept neurons by sharing the same mind space with humans, learning from this global neural network, and ultimately hosting advanced consciousness, however somewhat different than that of an ordinary human. The cybernetic approach seems to be a valid one. Let the complexity and hyperconnectivity of the global neural network bootstrap on its own complexity and evolve until the emergent global mind redistributes itself into semi-autonomous conscious AI entities. Humans are evolving away from biological systems towards more technological ones. Beyond genetic engineering, many forms of the coming neurotechnologies will allow us to modify our brains and consequently our mental capacities by merging this technology and eventually becoming digital minds practically indistinguishable from our future creations. Book, The Syntellect Hypothesis, just has been released and now available on Amazon and through the website textadelic.net. So what we just been talking about, it's all there in the book. So I encourage you to read it and ponder about all the developments and the pathways to the AI singularity, and from what I say, from Homo sapiens to Holo Syntellectus. Yeah, so check the book online. It's all over the internet. The Syntellect Hypothesis, 5 Paradigms of the Mind's Evolution. So the 5 paradigms I'm talking about in the book, the new genesis, computational biology, wherein chemistry gives rise to biology. The second paradigm is technoculture, the rise of man, when neurobiology gives rise to technology and civilization. Third paradigm is singularity, is the Syntellect Emergence. The posthuman era begins. Theogenesis, transdimensional propagation and universal expansion, transcending low dimensionality, inner space exploration, and outer space colonization. The 5th paradigm is the universal mind, multiversal propagation, ever higher cosmic levels of emergent complexity. A prominent physicist, Freeman Dyson, once said, "I do not make any clear distinction between mind and God. God is what mind becomes when it has passed beyond the scale of our comprehension." So I'd like to conclude this with a couple of quotes of mine from the book. The Syntellect Emergence seems to be a cosmic necessity, the nature's tendency to build up hierarchies of emergent patterns. The heuristic law of evolution supersedes the human race itself. Our current efforts are laying the foundation for the infrastructure of the forthcoming universal intelligence. Many of our achievements in information engineering may persist forever and eventually become parts of the internal architecture of God. Well, thank you very much. You can find me textadelic.net, on Facebook, Alex Vikoulov, Extadelic Media, Twitter, Extadelic, and my first and last name, and or shoot me an email, vikoulov@gmail.com.
Extadelic Media.